So yeah, I'm Tom. 2 years ago, I moved from this creative agency world into Jellyfish, which is a digital-first, full-service marketing services company, with its origins in performance, but really is now just as happy anywhere in marketing's metaphorical funnel. So my talk today is about Bothism. It's essentially a plea for us all to end the false choice between long and short-term marketing tactics, because both short-termism and long-termism really just wrong-termism in my view. It's a plea for us to start to close this value-destroying divide between brand and performance marketing. I've called it the business case for Bothism. And I'm going to talk about the origins of Bothism, what it is, why it's especially relevant right now to talk about it, and a few pointers on how to do it, and a couple of bits on its impact and thinking about measuring that. So, Mark Ritson, started talking about Bothism a couple of years ago after he'd read this article that I wrote called The Wrong and the Short of It, which is on my blog. I wrote blog articles and Marketing Week articles. He shared it on LinkedIn, and somebody called David Thomas pointed out in a comment on LinkedIn that he expected this article and Ritson's promotion of it to become known as the Bothism model. Surprisingly, until that point, nobody had been really talking about Bothism in this context. And in the article, I talked about how long-term versus short-term is probably the most commonly cited false choice in marketing. And that's saying something, because we love false dichotomies in this industry: brand versus performance, emotional versus rational, creativity versus technology, media versus creative, intuition versus data, art versus science. All of these things are just constantly debated in our world, and normally the answer is some kind of combination. Normally the answer is and. It's usually not or, and it's certainly not versus, which is ridiculous to kind of oppose things like that. So, now it may seem a little unnecessary for yet more to be said about this, because actually the long and the short term in marketing is got an amazing book. It's now coming up to 10 years old, written by Binet Field, called The Long and the Short of It. These two industry legends had sort of covered it, hadn't they? But actually it's really weird that people forget that, that this book, the most important word in the title is and, but they think of Binet Field as somehow, I've heard them referred to as the high priests of the long term, which is just wrong. They believe in Bothism. They believe in and as much as anybody. In fact, it's some kind of marketing law, I think, that those two charts have to be present in a presentation like this. So I've got those in there. I'm obeying the law right now. So if you had to distill down that book's fundamental contribution to advertising into one line, it would be about how it defined the two core ways that marketing works and the two timescales it does it in: short-term sales activation and longer-term brand building. You get them called different things, performance and brand, but essentially two different timescales things work in. It's a book that argues for both and for balance, but somehow we still find ourselves in these arguments about what's more important, whether to do things short or long-term, etc. And as I've said, they get called the high priests of the long term, which is kind of crazy. But whilst the theory says we should all try to achieve a balanced approach in order to maximize both saleability in the longer term and sales in the shorter term, and do those things simultaneously, there's a massive gulf, I think, still in the theory and the actual practice, which still tends to be divided between practitioners of brand and performance marketing in a client side, agency side, everywhere. This is a great chart that Les and Peter didn't publish in the book, but I think is a really helpful addition. It was a forerunner to their famous zigzag kind of steps chart. And it shows that the long and the short are always happening simultaneously to some degree in the same execution, in the same ad, in the same spot, in the same campaign. It shows two kinds of sales impacts from a single exposure to a single execution: a short-term sales spike in red and a longer-term tail in black. Those two lines are interrelated. If you try to push the red spike higher, the black longer tail will shorten. So to achieve equilibrium, you'll need a balance across a campaign and across your entire marketing plan. As Peter Drucker said, long-term results cannot be achieved by piling short-term results on short-term results. It's more complicated than being additive. It's a multiplicative, compound effect which starts slowly but strengthens over time. And whilst all long-term growth actually has its roots in the short term. Only some kinds of short-term activity also leads to long-term results. Short-term growth sometimes leads to long-term growth. Long-term growth always needs short-term growth. And LinkedIn's 95-5 rule is a brilliant new kind of heuristic rule of thumb that I think is a fantastic addition to the theory. It helps us understand why balancing both long and short are important. It's for B2B, which usually has longer buying cycles, but the principle will likely hold for any brand. You always have far fewer buyers in market right now than who will be in the market in the future. In B2B, it's around 5% in market right now, 95% in market in the future. So you need to find ways of both speaking to immediate buyers and also future buyers, not just focusing on that 5%, which is a route to failure, ultimately. This is a view that works really well, especially to speak to finance community in our brand's client side, and to help them understand how spending money now can help drive sales tomorrow. It's very close in mindset to the great definition of brand from a commercial perspective that anyone's ever heard from Tim Ambler, which is this: a brand is an upstream reservoir of future cash flow. Finance people get that. It's far different from the usual kind of airy-fairy definitions of brand that you get from creative strategy people like me. And this is a related horticultural metaphor loved by Mark Ritson about how you cultivate your brand. If your brand is a tree, you have to water the roots for it to grow. Picking fruit without watering the tree is unsustainable. And another metaphor, just to kind of round it off, it's a really simple one. In an alley-oop, in basketball, if brand activity is the pass, performance activity is the dunk. The two work together. Without them, you wouldn't get the hoop. So that's the what of Bothism, and now a little bit on the why, and specifically why now. So there's definitely a sense that despite the hard times we're about to face, or we are already facing, and the constraints and budgets that that's likely to mean, a greater understanding of the need for balance I definitely think is emerging. There's a bit of a course correction that's happening. I think as we sort of, we come to terms with and understand the implications of digital. Digital has become more mature now, and we understand how it works better. We're seeing VCs and investors in startups and scale-ups and other types of businesses get fed up with unprofitable tech businesses that have been allowed to grow their user bases but not become profitable. The inflationary period we're in is putting more pressure on companies to put up prices. And so something that brand communication is especially good at, and that performance activity actually isn't very good at all, is to support price premium or even a price increase if you need to. And that's something I think that we've forgotten about in marketing as the kind of pendulum swung too far towards performance. And performance isn't proven to be able to support price in the same way as brand building. Third, we're seeing many performance-driven brands really learning the hard way to get some balance into their plans. As we see some failures out there, and some brands like ASOS and Airbnb really course correct with the way they're trying to achieve growth through more balanced approaches. And fourth and finally, something that's happening, I think, is more of a macro trend for a decade. Digital is now beginning to mature. Brand building is becoming more possible in digital. And the long-promised idea that TV is not dead, it's having babies, really does seem to be happening. Now we have real momentum behind connected and addressable TV. So that's quite, I think it's a really exciting development in the advertising marketplace. Kantar's Brand Z data has always shown that strong brands outperform stock markets, and absolutely are. Brand building is great, and strong brands are more resilient. They come out of recessions earlier, and was more resilient in times of crisis. So there's a very strong argument for brand building there, possibly a year or so ago, but I think nonetheless, it's if you want to get out of recession quicker, then brand building is going to be the way to do it. Pricing power is one of Warren Buffett's real favorite metrics when it comes to valuing businesses and understanding businesses. And this is one of my favorite quotes from him. Only brand marketing can really have an impact on this. So the single most important decision in evaluating a business is pricing power. If you've got the power to raise prices without losing business to a competitor, you've got a very good business. And if you have to say a prayer before raising the price by 10%, then you've got a terrible business. So again, he's a really huge believer in brand building, and he should know. We've recently seen a couple of really major digital-first brands, Course Correct, as I've said, and a couple of brands, and several brands in the UK market, having quite, essentially failing. Now, this isn't to say that, the two brands at the bottom there would still be in existence today had they had a more balanced plan. Who knows? But I think it definitely means post-recession people are going to be wanting to prioritize resilience, price, profitability, and Bothism is a really strong answer to those things. So how to do it? Well, first, trying to achieve equilibrium and not be wrong-termists. Wrong-termists get it wrong in two different ways. Short-termists on the left restrict the long-term growth their marketing can achieve, and long-termists on the right restrict its short-term sales impact. You want to be in the middle, creating good levels of demand and good levels of conversion, a balance of salability in the future and sales now. Ritson talks about funnel juggling, which is a strange phrase, but essentially he talks about different ways you can combine long and short. There are different ways of balancing your activity. He talks about doing long then short, or doing long as well as short. So lots of executions which are either short or long simultaneously, or you can do it all in one. So when one execution does both. All can work. I know that Les Binet doesn't really believe that the version on the right is the optimal way to do it, but that's, it's a personal view, I think. So long as you create balance in whatever way in your communication, you need to do that. Channels-wise, we're seeing more and more evidence from econometric studies that digital channels can actually do both. It comes down to targeting and creative content. You can see from this chart from Demand Generator, TV and search is a really great combination to do both. It just makes loads of sense. You're sat in your room watching a screen, you've got your phone in your hand. So combination of linear TV or any TV and digital channels is really strong. Meta's very recent long-term MMM econometric study by NEPA shows, and this was for a set of 6 retail and telco brands in the Nordics, this showed that a variety of digital channels can deliver both long and short-term growth and could be part of a balanced plan. Unsurprisingly, Meta's channels come across quite well in this, but I think it does add to the learning. Online video is very strong. TV, as you'd expect, a very strong performer on both. I thought I'd share a case study by Gusto, the meal kit subscription brand, which was presented at the IPA conference last month. They found they were spending far too much, 100% of their ad budgets on performance activity. Essentially, they found that if they stopped advertising, their customer acquisition stopped. So if your sales stop when you stop advertising, you're probably doing it wrong, I'd say. Which is kind of ironic, because I think people often think advertising is immediate sales. But what they did was to switch from 100% paid performance ads, which were driving 80% of their customer acquisition, to a ratio of 60-40. They claim they got to that ratio incrementally. It wasn't an aim to get to 60-40. 60-40 is the standard Binet Field kind of rule of thumb. It was a coincidence, they say, that they ended up there. But after 3 years, they'd shifted their balance to 60-40, and by then 75% of their sales were coming organically. Essentially, they'd raised their base sales, and only 25% were coming from short-term paid advertising. So they'd increased their base, they'd reduced their reliance on paid advertising, they'd created a larger reservoir of consumers who were ready to think of that brand when they fell into the market. And this was a really useful model, I thought, that they built to persuade their finance partners how it was all going to work. Brand building was going to grow a pool, a reservoir of future consumers who were going to be ready to fall into the market, and their paid ads would help convert those people when they fell into the market. And now a couple of thoughts on the impact of all this and a couple of thoughts on how you can measure it as well. So this from Les Binet is a real-world version of his and Peter Field's famous zigzag or steps chart. And for this brand, the yellow tail was 60% of the sales, the red spikes 40%. I think this was a TV example. This kind of analysis is derived from MMM, so econometrics, which I think is a pretty fundamental piece of the measurement jigsaw if you're going to be thinking in this way. You need something that's going to be able to properly unpick the longer term effects of your advertising spend. So it's an important toolkit. And here's a chart by econometrician Grace Kite and me, building on that classic steps chart. We wanted to look at the perspective of a kind of digital-first modern brand where switching things off isn't really an option. You need to be keeping that always-on activity in digital. We identified this moment called the performance plateau, where often digital brands get to a certain level, they start to max out in digital, and then they need to look for something else. And I think that's actually something that potentially for these kinds of brands, addressable TV is a really useful has a really useful application for them. And you can see the kind of triple benefits of brand building. You've got the short and long spikes in the green, and you've got this additional impact on performance activity in the pink. And combined together, that is, all of those three things happening together you get this long and short-term effect. You might have seen some stuff from me if you follow my blog on the dangers of ROI and ROAS. I just wanted to emphasize those things. People get obsessed with ROI. It can be quite dangerous. Byron Sharp talks about how it can send you broke if you're always maximizing to ROI, because the fundamental logical conclusion of maximizing to ROI is you'd actually end up reducing your media spend, because that's the easiest way to maximize ROI. And then this point about ROAS. If you're a digital-first brand that's obsessed with ROAS, it's equally dangerous, if not more so. And you can end up essentially optimizing everything to the last click, and that will mean you're kind of ignoring at your peril the importance of brand building, the importance of warming a wider audience up, and you can end up really horribly skewing what you're doing and giving too much credit to short-term digital channels. Somebody likened it to if you had 10 strikers on the pitch, if you removed all your defence in your midfield, you put 10 Mbappes on the field. Actually, that would probably be quite good, wouldn't it? But you might be in danger of massively of kind of not getting those balls through to the strikers and not actually scoring in the end. I just wanted to touch on the funnel, the standard funnel. I wrote a bit about this recently. There are problems with the standard awareness consideration conversion funnel. It's not really built on any modern marketing science. It's not built on what we know about how brands grow. Awareness is a very, very blunt word and instrument. It doesn't build in the concept of mental availability, which is really important. Consideration is always assumed to be there, but many brands, many categories don't need much consideration at all. Conversion, I think, suggests advertising is a really strong force when mostly it's a pretty weak force. And search is often playing quite a different role from conversion. Search is often playing a navigational role, helping people who've already chosen you to get to you and find you. So this was a revised funnel that we use at Jellyfish, which talks about building, nudging, and connecting. So you build and refresh brand memories and associations. You nudge those, you remind people when they're in the market of your brand, your distinctive assets. And then you connect them, people who are already coming to you, you help them on their journey, on their way. And we think about different kinds of growth metrics along that journey. So it's not hugely different, it's just a bit more based in what we know about how brand building works. And it's a bit more thinking about how brand and performance work through the funnel. Rather than thinking of the funnel as brand then performance, thinking about all of those things happening simultaneously through the journey. I've done a lot of brand building for Jellyfish and a bit for me. I wanted to do some selling now, which is, this is a share of search dashboard that we've built at Jellyfish. It's open to anybody. We're quite proud of it. It's you've heard share of search being talked about. It's a really simple, useful tool to help measure mental availability. And it's a really nice, simple, easy to use thing that we've got going. You can put your key competitors in there. It does a quite neat thing, which is, this is a thing we built for H&M, where you can look at different subcategories and the search trends in there. So I think share of search is a really interesting metric because it's something that can combine both brand and performance people. Both are quite into it. So it's a nice way for different parties in an organization to have something that they can both understand and get behind. So that's basically it. That's my message. Goodbye performance marketing. Hello marketing performance. How to build a marketing effectiveness culture is essential to that. I think marketing effectiveness culture is going to eat strategy for breakfast, essentially. And I want to give the last word to Ritson, because you sort of have to. I asked, I don't know if anybody's played with ChatGPT yet. It's quite a thing. And it's going to change all of our lives in some way. Whether it's going to leave us redundant or it's going to enhance our lives, I don't know. But I asked ChatGPT to write in the style of sweary marketing professor Mark Ritson that brands have to be both this and to do both brand building and performance activities simultaneously. And this is what it said. Brands need to stop being fucking one-sided and start being both this. That means doing both fucking brand building and performance activity. Don't be a fucking moron. Get with the program and start being both this. Hashtag marketing, hashtag branding. So...
Thanks, Tom. Thanks.
Thank you.